Thank you everyone for coming out today. I have a question for everyone. What is a man? And what is masculinity? How are we affected by these things, or more accurately, the lack thereof? Society is trying to redefine the traditional notion of masculinity. This should concern us because of increased fatherlessness, weight issues, and crime rates. Now, in the beginning, God created humans. Their job was to have dominion over everything on the earth, and men have been seen as leaders and protectors for all of history. Now, people are trying to redefine them so they don't have to do these things. Masculinity is the attributes of a man, such as responsibility, leadership, and being driven to be the best possible version of themselves. Other aspects of masculinity are the psychological side. Men and women, for that matter, are made to have a sound mind and strong will. That's how God created us, to be independent thinkers and not rely on other people for our opinions. It also means men use self-control. Another part of masculinity is the physical aspect. Men are supposed to be fit and muscular. And by muscular, I don't mean you should look like The Rock, but you should be able to see your toes. Jesus said that your body is a temple, which is the house of the Lord. If someone came into your house and started throwing trash everywhere and destroying your furniture, you would not be too fond of that, would you? I'll answer that question for you. No, you would not. And if you're a Christian, you should especially take care of your body, because that means Jesus lives in you. The final is the spiritual aspect. Men should be able to lead others down a path of righteousness and lead their families in a sound spiritual doctrine. They should be able to also lead their communities correctly. Now, I'm going to share a couple of biblical examples of masculinity. First of all, we're going to take a look at the first man, Adam. God created Adam, and he was given dominion over everything. He was to name all the animals and everything, and work the ground. After the fall, he was told to toil and work the ground. Then he had a son named Cain. Cain was overcome by sin and bloodlust. He ended up killing his brother. This is the form of man we see today. Another example from the Bible is David. David was one of the best examples of masculinity in the Bible. He showed all aspects of masculinity. For the physical part, he was very fit, and we know this because he ended up killing a giant, Goliath, at the age of 16 and 19, which is the age of most high schoolers. He had the mental side because, if you don't know the story of David, his family tried to kill him multiple times, but he always stayed strong. Nothing could stop him. And he also had the spiritual part. He trusted God with everything he had. He was called the man after God's own heart. He messed up and he had his flaws, but he kept going. He would always ask God for forgiveness, and he'd always confess his sins. A final example I have from the Bible is Job. Job was believed to live after Adam and before Abraham. He was a very wealthy man. He had lots of possessions, children, and livestock. And he loved God with everything he had. But the devil came to God one day and said, he only loves you because of all this things that he has. So God said, you may take everything from him. You just cannot harm him physically. So the devil destroyed all his crops, killed his livestock, and killed his family. He still ended up praising God in the end, though. And the devil said, this is only because he still has his physical health. So God said, you may hurt him, but you cannot kill him. So the devil gave him terrible boils, and he suffered for days upon days. But he still praised God through all this. This shows all the aspects of masculinity. He was very physically strong, obviously, because the devil attacked his physical being. He was spiritually strong, clearly, because he praised God through the worst trials and tribulations. Now, everyone agrees that men have roles in society, but not everyone agrees about these roles. Some people think that men should be leaders, take charge, and protect others. However, some people think that men should sit back and let women fill these roles. But I believe the latter is an incorrect view. I believe men should not be watered down into something we're not meant to be. I have 3 reasons to support this argument. First, the lack of strong men leads to a rise in fatherlessness. Next, men have issues with weight, which affects mental health. And last of all, crime rates over the last 10 to 15 years have risen dramatically. Now, to prove my first point, in America there are 18.3 million kids who live without a father. That is about 25% of the US population. Then, also, 57.6% of black children, 31.2% of Hispanic children, and 20.7% of white children are living without their biological father. And third, according to the Rochester Area Fatherhood Network, children from fatherless homes are more likely to become poor, become involved with drug and alcohol abuse, drop out of school, and suffer from mental and emotional health problems. Boys are more likely to become involved in crime, and girls are more likely to become pregnant as teens. Children have been told it's okay to do whatever you want by society. Young men have taken over the streets and make up a majority of the crime rate. And the majority of these young men have no good masculine figure to teach them about what a man is supposed to be. Now, how does this relate to masculinity, you may ask? Well, as I said earlier, real men take responsibility for their actions. So if you're man enough to have sex, then you should be man enough to raise a child. Now, for my second point. As of 2018, there are 43% of men considered to be obese from the age of 20 to 39. These ages are considered to be the prime of a man's life. Second, to put some historical context on this, in 1960, only 14% of the US population had a BMI or body mass index of over 30, which is considered obese. Now, over 40% have a BMI of over 30. And third, according to the CDC, obesity-related medical care costs the United States public $147 billion a year. Not only is obesity costing the US taxpayers billions of dollars, but it also affects the future of our country. According to the National Institute of Health Research, people who are obese are 2.5 times more likely to develop heart diseases than that of someone of a healthy weight. Now, people may find this irrelevant, but as I stated earlier, the true image of masculinity is having a fit body and a fit mind. And according to the U.S. National Institute of Health, obese people are more likely to struggle with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and substance abuse. Now, for my third point, I would like to talk about crime rates. This is a huge issue in America. According to macrotrends.net, crime rates in the U.S. are at a 28.64% increase. This is a huge issue for obvious reasons. Now, men in the U.S. make up 80% of violent crimes. This is not including crimes such as theft or fraud. Also, men make up 93.1% of inmates in the U.S. This is a massive issue because men only make up 49.5% of the population. You may ask, how does this relate to masculinity? Well, as I stated earlier, real men are able to exert self-control. And if you can exert self-control, there should be no reason for you to be in prison. Now, people may say that men have too much power. People may say men are too toxic and they need to be changed for these reasons. Both of these arguments are easily debunked. One, men have had power for almost all of history. And the issue with these men is not the fact that they're men, it's the fact that they're broken, they're sinners. Now, the second argument is just as easily debunked. The fact that men are toxic is not necessarily true. Real men are not toxic, and they don't go around throwing their weight for fear. The model of a man we see today is similar to Cain in the Bible, as I stated earlier. These are not real men. Real men are modeled after Jesus, who was in fact the perfect man. He was kind to all people. He did not try to assert his superiority over other people, even though he had every right to do so. He was in fact the creator of the universe. So what does this all have in common? Men, or more accurately, the lack of masculine men. Men who are responsible and good leaders in their communities, homes, and country. The lack of good men in our society is affecting our youth. This includes young men and women alike. Young men need a father figure in their life to teach them what it takes to be a man, just as young women need a woman in their life to teach them what it means to be a woman. Men in our society have either become lazy and fat or become animals, robbing, looting, and killing people. Men have just stopped taking responsibility for things in their life, such as their kids. Society has said it's okay to just sleep around. And whenever you, quote, mess up and have a child, you can either abort the baby or just leave it with the mother. Now, this is setting our country and world up for a major collapse. Jordan Peterson is someone who has been warning our world about this for quite some time. He said that if we don't do something about this crisis soon, our world will be in a spiral so bad we'll never be able to get out. So, how do we do this? How do we fix this crisis of masculinity? Well, first, we need to recognize the issue. The issue is that human beings are broken. We're sinners, and no one's perfect. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It's not an excuse to give up. We need to educate men. That's how we fix this. And that's easier than it sounds. All we have to do is look at the perfect example of a man, Jesus. Now, I know that everyone doesn't believe that Jesus was God, but we know that he most definitely existed. And we know facts about his life, like the fact that he was kind to other people. He did not strive to make himself look better or assert his superiority over them, even though he had every right to do so. Now, I'm sure that we've heard the saying, I am the man of the house. Now, this saying does not mean that you should treat other people like trash just because you have authority in the house. It means that you're supposed to protect and lead your house in an appropriate way. And there's no need to be angry if you ask someone to do something and they don't do it. Simply ask them to do it again. And then if they don't do it, think about how Jesus would handle this situation. When he was in the garden with his disciples, he asked them to stay up and keep watch. They did not. They fell asleep. Instead of getting mad and yelling at them, he simply had a man-to-man conversation with them. And we could see that hurt them more than anything else. It drove them to be better. In fact, they all ended up dying for him later in their lives. So, in conclusion, society is redefining the traditional notion of masculinity. This should concern us because of a lack of strong men leads to a rise in fatherlessness. Men have serious issues with weight, which affects mental health, and crime rates have risen dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years. This is an issue because they don't need to refine men. They just need to be taught how to be men, how to be like Jesus. This matters to everyone because whether you like it or not, you're affected by men. And men, we need to stand up and take control of our lives. Thank you.
Open up the question.
So Joshua, as a mother of 4 sons, and the grandmother of 3 grandsons, I thank you for tackling this topic. You said we need to educate men. You also said we need to teach boys how to be men. So boys spend 13 years, for the most part, in schools. What would you suggest that teachers can go about helping male students grow into responsible men?
That is a very good question. So, as I stated earlier, there's an issue with fatherlessness in the U.S. And so someone that people see almost just as much as their parents is teachers. And so teachers should be setting an example for young men. So if you're a male teacher, you should be showing young men what a model of a true man looks like. You shouldn't be like, letting people walk over you, but you should also not be like, angry all the time and like trying to assert your dominance over people just because you're a man. And to be honest, men can do that. We're physically more strong than women, but that doesn't mean we should. So.
Well, I will also thank you for this topic as the father of 5 daughters, because I think it's equally important. 2 different times you said that Cain is the form of man we see today. I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit.
So, if people don't know the story of Cain, he was supposed to bring a sacrifice to God, and he did not bring his best sacrifice. He kind of just rejected God and was like, "I'm going to do what I want." And that's what we see today. Men have, society in general has just rejected God, and it's really affected men, and you can see that just based on the statistics I have with fatherlessness, crime rates, and all that. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
some of the problems that you listed, like weight issues, weren't that different between men and women in our world?
I didn't really look at the women's statistics on this because I'm doing my presentation on men.
Okay.
And I think it is important for all people to be fit because the Bible does say that your body's a temple and you should be able to keep your temple, in good condition. So.
Yeah. Okay. So you're that's a good answer. I guess I'm wondering if there's part of the problems you're addressing are human problems, and then some of the problems you're addressing are really, truly men and women differences. And I think a little bit more clarity about which ones might be problems that are, part of modern secular society and our, the kind of lifestyles that we're all in together, our work rhythms, and the other way, a consumerist society kind of runs, and how our schools operate, sort of things that we share. So being overweight might be a shared, at least, generally American problem, for example. So clarifying that could be helpful. But let me jump to specifically what author you mentioned. Jordan Peterson, I think, is the one name of a writer, academic figure. But what writer or academic do you think has the best list of what's distinctly feminine characteristics and distinctly masculine characteristics? Because that's one of the hardest things. I've read a lot of Christian theology on this topic, and it's extremely difficult. One way to make it practical is to say, can a woman teach you about masculinity? And she can, in all kinds of ways. So it gets very difficult to make that list. But what author do you think does the best job of listing out what's really distinctly feminine and distinctly masculine as far as characteristics?
Well, I think the best author is probably God, because he lists that out in the Bible. It's very clear. If you just read through the whole Bible, you can see, especially in the Old Testament, very distinct roles men and women have, and very distinct jobs that God gave men versus women. And obviously, as I said, it's not an issue for women to lead, because God did appoint multiple female leaders in the Bible. It's just it's just something about when there's a male leader. It's like, it gives people hope and all that. So, yeah.
You mentioned the kind of important role that male teachers can have in helping to teach about masculinity. But aside from that, how can fatherless sons learn about masculinity?
Well, a big thing is, I would say, find someone who is a true model of a man. So maybe go to your local church and start talking to your pastor about it, or if you have a really good Christian teacher that you know of, go talk to them about it. See if they know someone, or even that person themselves could be a mentor to you. And I definitely think a mentor helps, but it is not the same as your biological father.
So I've lived here in New York City for 35 years, and I see these things played out in my neighbors, the people I love here in the city. I'm wondering if you can shed any light on how poverty undermines a boy's opportunities to grow into masculinity, into manhood.
Yes, that's a very good question. So poverty, I think, a lot of times fathers end up leaving their kids, especially in inner cities like this, is because of poverty, and because they don't really want to support kids and all that. And I think that's a big issue, because once, as I stated in my speech here, children without fathers are more likely to stay impoverished. So a father can help your child, motivate your child to, do good in life, to succeed in life, And we do see that a lot here in the city. Like children without fathers, they end up just falling back into the same cycle that their family's been in. You know, poor, living off of, you know, whatever they can, and then they end up doing the same thing their dad did. They end up having a kid, they leave the kid, and then their kid repeats the cycle. So, does that answer your question?
So you're advocating for a kind of defense of masculinity as something that we shouldn't, you know, throw under the bus and run down, so that we can give boys something to aspire to and become. But I'm thinking of the last presentation on, you know, sexualizing young girls and sexualizing each other in general, men and women in our society. Do you think men do tend to have a kind of tendency to visually sexualize others in different ways, or more problematic ways potentially than women on average?
Yes, I do actually. Well, men, it's a proven statistic that men are more visual than women. And men have more visual stimulators than women in their eyes, actually. So men do tend to, sexualize people more, and they do tend to, they do all those things that you just stated. So.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think you could actually strengthen your case by saying that, you know, there's both sort of positive and negative reasons with regard to the way men are. That means we should uphold masculinity, because men need it, you know, for positive reasons and for negative reasons. There's some of the biological realities, as it were. We need help in certain ways women don't, perhaps. Yeah.
I appreciated your citing of particularly Adam and David as examples of, and of course of Christ, but I'm going to key in on Adam and David because one thing they had to do that Christ never did was repent. But especially David, I appreciate that you cited him as a model of masculinity, because he did some things, many things that our 21st century American brand of masculinity might not consider masculine, writing lots and lots of poetry. Some might even argue like emo poetry, like lots and lots of psalms of lament, lots of sad poems, and getting criticized by one of his wives for dancing naked in the streets in praise to God. Not what we would call the model of masculinity, but I agree with you that he is a good model of masculinity. One of the things that they also both represent very well, that is a very masculine trait, or really a human trait, but for the context of your argument is a masculine one, is the need to own our mistakes and to repent of them. I wonder if you can kind of just expand on that and why that's particularly important.
Because it's important to like admit when you're wrong, because that really, people think that it shows weakness, but it actually shows how much stronger you are than other people, because a lot of people aren't willing to admit when they're wrong. And that's something that David did, and he ended up, like, God said that he was a man after his own heart, and David always admitted when he was wrong. Even like story of David and Bathsheba, like he actually killed a guy to get a wife, so then he repented to God about it. He was like, oh, that wasn't the best decision I've ever made. So
we do have time for one more question.
Can you tell us a little bit about where you've learned and been most inspired in your own masculinity? Oh, Warren said that's an obvious answer.
I would definitely say my grandfather and my youth pastor. Both of them have really driven me to be a better man, and my dad. All three of them. My youth pastor, he definitely brings a more like biblical aspect to it than my dad and my grandfather. They bring the more practical aspects, as in like work ethic and all that. So.
Great job.